until things got very out of control. So as a young man, he would do really, really wild things. One was he ran away from home when he was a little bit younger. He was 17 at the time, and I was going out of town for a week, and he was going with the 3 kids to his dad's, and he didn't want to go. He wanted to stay alone. A 17-year-old who has a drug problem wanted to stay at home.
Sure he did.
And so I was like, that's not happening. So Richard found a girl at the high school who knew of an anarchy group. This is a crazy story because we are in a conservative town. Her father was like a prominent doctor at the hospital. And he, of course, finds the one person in the entire school that knows this. And she said, they can help you disappear. You don't have to go anywhere this week. So he went with this girl to the city, and I was supposed to be going away. I thought he was in school, noticed I was about to leave for the airport. My money was missing out of my wallet, and I was like, I knew it was Richard. I knew it was. There was no one else. He had gone down to the city. They dyed his hair blonde, and he looked a lot like Big Bird.
Oh, my goodness.
And they smashed his phone, got him a Go phone and a new ID, and they put him on a bus to New York City and gave him a list of groups in New York City that he could stay with. So there he went, thinking this is a really grand idea. And he left, and so we didn't know where he was.
Now, let me ask you a question before you finish the story. I'm curious and if you even know this, if you shared it with you, what he was running from, what the doctors or the therapy people were telling him was going on. Listen, when I was 12, my mother sent me to a therapeutic boarding school. During that therapeutic boarding school in Running Springs, California, which I did graduate from, but it was pretty miserable being there. I mean, the stuff you go through. I was put on one of those wilderness adventures myself. So I know from both perspectives, me having gone through it, what that was like, but also from a parent's perspective and my mother, why she did it or why she thought she did it or why the help. She had no other option. I mean, she needed to figure out what the story was and how to help because as a single mother, she didn't know what else to do. But I'm just curious what you think he was running from and towards. Do you know what I mean? By not going through the programs, by not learning the lessons, by not finishing, wanting to be in school, or where do you feel like he wanted to be, do you think?
He wanted to party and he wanted to stay. Seriously, he didn't want to go to any more rehabs. He just wanted to have fun with his friends.
Right.
And he didn't want to be with a parent at the time. He wanted to be on his own. And when I said, no, you cannot stay alone, he really at that time was all about the party, the drugs.
So it was a rebellion. He just wanted
It was a rebellion, and he, was an addict. So the addiction had started.
Right.
And so whatever he could do to find
those friends,
those drugs, the party, the fun, whatever he could do at that time is what he did.
Right.
And so he ended up in New York, didn't know where he was. He called the hotline. Of course, he's very dramatic. You have to remember this about him. And he loved shock and awe. Like, he didn't just borrow a friend's phone. He ended up at a friend's college dorm room in New York, called the runaway hotline, and got me on the phone because it couldn't just be a regular phone, right?
Oh, my gosh.
And so he said, I'm sorry, I want to come home. So I did not send him a plane ticket. I did not make it easy for him at that point. I said, you got there on a bus, so I'm sending you enough money for food and a bus ticket. He took the bus and a train and ended up back at our house. And 2 weeks later, as I was walking through my foyer, kind of thinking, how is this my life? How did we get here? How did I get here? How did my kids get here? I was sort of pausing, and I look out the front window, and there's 2 black Suburbans that slowly pull up in front of my house. And I'm like, is this like Men in Black? Like, what's happening? And 3 people, 2 men and a woman, got out in suits with a briefcase. And I'm like, is this some sort of punk? Am I on YouTube? Like, what is happening? Right. And they came up to the front door and boop, FBI. We'd like to talk to Richard, please.
Oh, gosh.
I'm like, you want to talk to Richard? Next thing I know, Richard and his friend, high as kites, are running through the house. They jump in the car. I'm like, don't leave. He's like, I don't want to go to rehab again, Mom.
Oh, he thought they were coming to get him
yes.
for rehab.
I ran out the door and literally spread eagle on top of the car. Like, Richard, you get out of that car right now. I said, the FBI wants to talk to you.
Oh, my gosh.
He goes, well, why didn't you tell me that in the first place, Mom? Of course I want to talk to them. He gets out.
That was less scary than going to rehab?
Oh, yeah.
Who knew what they were there for? Did he?
He didn't know.
Right.
He didn't know. So he's like, I'd love to talk to the FBI because
like, this is so fun.
Like, this is so fun.
Right.
So he gets out and shakes their hand. I'm Richard. It's nice to meet you. One of them, I'm going to turn my beef stew off the stove because it's like boiling over at this point. And one follows me in the kitchen. Two go in the living room with Richard. And I hear the words, under cover. And I ran into the living room, and Richard's got his arms up, and he's talking, and they're sitting, he's holding court, and he said, Mom, they want me to go undercover in that anarchy group. Isn't that cool? Oh. Isn't that cool? Richard, over my dead body, are you doing that? FBI, thank you so much for visiting today. Here's the front door.
Right.
So those types of stories happened from that time when he was 17 until the time he passed away at 24.
Right. I'm just curious of two things. How was your ex-husband handling all this in his house or coming over to your house? What was his involvement? And also, the other two children, because they weren't causing such a ruckus,
yes,
did they get forgotten during this? Or they were very much involved with their brother and figuring out what was going on?
They were sheltered from as much of it as I could because I wanted them to have a more normal childhood.
Mm-hmm. So they were in school.
They were in school. Nick was 3 years younger than Richard, and so he would get text messages like, "Oh, I hear your brother's down on a yacht with Wiz Khalifa on Lake Michigan," and he'd be like, "Mom, you won't believe." So I would get those types of stories and things. But my daughter was very, very young. Mm-hmm. She was like first, second, third grade.
Right.
So she doesn't remember a lot of it, but she does remember when I told her that we had a possum family living under our front steps because Richard was smoking pot on the side of the house. Oh. And she's like, what's that smell? I'm like, it's possums or skunks or something like that. I'm not really sure, but we're just going to leave them be because they can live there.
Right. And your ex-husband?
And my ex-husband. He was involved. He was very involved with all three kids. Mm-hmm. He was always trying to get Richard healthy and suggesting things to do. Mm-hmm. The other kids were really busy. Nick was playing hockey, and he played football and hockey and lacrosse and had great grades. But, those two flew under the radar, and they did normal, sketchy kid things. Right. The normal drinking and having parties at my house. Those normal things.
So they saw Richard as someone who was living the fast life, not necessarily like he was a mess and he was missing and he was...
As they got a little bit older, Nicholas always knew that there was a problem. Uh-huh. And as my daughter got older, she definitely, after some of the shenanigans or being in a rehab and walking out after 2 days saying, I'm cured, she would say, Mom, he's just not making good choices. So they were very close to Richard when he was home. Mm-hmm. I did have to kick him out once because the drugs were getting to be too much and I didn't want them to affect the other kids.
Sure, right.
So I did that as well.
So I know at some point Richard does take a turn and gets clean. How did that happen?
That happened really because almost the courts demanded it. So he had been using heroin, and I had no idea he was using heroin. I know that might sound like I'm stupid, but I really did not know that became his drug of choice. And he was home in his room in the suburbs because he always had a place. And he was calling me at 6 in the morning. My phone kept ringing, and I picked it up, and he whispered, hospital. And I ran upstairs, and he had a bucket, and I just assumed he had the flu, of course. So I grabbed him. I grabbed the bucket and paper towel, put him in the car, drove to the hospital. And when they were taking him back, now he was 21 at this point. When they were taking him back, I always went back with him. Can your mother come back? He went, no. And so they put me in one of those little rooms where they tell you bad news. He was overdosing on heroin.
Oh, wow.
And when I got to see him.
And he knew it? I mean, he knew enough to say, okay, yeah.
He knew it. So he was in the hospital for about 5 days. And of course, everyone at the hospital, the social worker at the hospital was telling him it's not a matter of if, it's when, if you keep on this path of using heroin.
And wait, and they must have been the ones to tell you it was heroin, right?
Yes. One of the nurses came in, popped her head in, and did say to me, your son's been on a 5-day heroin binge. And my heart dropped. And then I felt stupid that I didn't know that. But how would I know? He was living in the city. He had come back late at night and showed up. Maybe he knew something was wrong. I don't know. So after that happened, and he came home, and I'm nursing him to health, and we're watching movies together and really bonding, he took a shower, got dressed. He used to say, love you, Mom, I'll be safe. He got up, and he 2 days later was leaving, and I literally got down on my hands and knees and begged him, don't leave. Something bad's going to happen if you leave. Oh, no, Mom, I'm cool. I'm safe. I'll be safe. Love you. So I stayed awake all night, and sure enough, at 5 a.m., I did get a call from the jail in Chicago at 27th and whatever that is. It's a very bad place. And he said, come get me. So I went, and he got out, and I said, is this bottom? Have you hit bottom now? And he was like, ugh, Mom, they were calling me Bieber, Justin Bieber in there. They're like, hey, Bieber, what are you doing in here? And he just laughed. He thought that was funny. The court date came. I still want to hug the judge. She said, welcome to the world of felonies where your life is no longer your own. It's mine. I still want to hug her. We got permission to
and
go.
that scared him enough, is what you're saying.
I could see him shaking up there, and I was there, and we asked if he could leave the state to go to Hazleton in Minnesota. It's a place I always wanted him to go. And the judge offered him there's an 8-month rehabilitation program in Chicago. They would rather rehabilitate than put people in jail, obviously. So he did go to Hazleton, and she said, of course, what's going to happen after that? Well, he got his help, and he went to Hazleton, and he got sober. And he was sober for the last 3 years of his life.